And good morning, Bills Mafia. That red light is on, which means this week's episode of Under Review is officially live. And on today's episode, we are going to be doing our very fun 2023 training camp preview. I am joined by Kevin Masseri and Mike Bunt from the Going Deep podcast, and we are going to cover anything we expect to see and maybe even some bold predictions from this year's training camp. Let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
And once again, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa. And today's theme is Jorlando, because I will be in Florida about 6 hours after this episode ends. And I'm very excited to get away for a week, escape the city, the usual vacation mumbo jumbo. But before we go to sunny, tropical, humid paradise, I would like to introduce my two guests, as I mentioned before. You can find them on Cover One's Going Deep podcast, but I will let them speak for themselves here. Mike Bunt, Kevin Masseri, thank you both so much for joining me today to talk about training camp. Let me hear your beautiful introductions today as we kick off this episode.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for having us. Excited to talk some more Bills football with you. Been on your show a few times, love it on here, and just excited to be talking about the beginning of camp coming up this next Wednesday.
Very excited for what we have in store as a whole unit. I think we're going to do some great content here coming up for training camp. You'll catch most of us at some type of crossover event. And then we have a lot of good things going on in Cover One, Joe. There's a lot of fun stuff. There's a gathering at some point here in the next few weeks. There's a new store launch we got. So it's an exciting time here as training camp hits us in just a few days.
A very exciting time to be a part of Cover One and also a viewer of Cover One. And there was a lot of opportunity to get even more involved with the fun. As Kevin and Mike mentioned, there will be a meetup next week. Gentlemen, it's July 28th, I believe. Excuse me.
Yep. This Friday at Folly Allen in Buffalo, I think 8 o'clock or sometime around there. I already know there's going to be a bunch of Cover One guys there, including myself. You're going to see some of the big time guys part of this network. So we just hang out, have some beers, and talk Bills football. So it's always a great time. Last year we had it at Uncle Jumbo's, and this year we're going to, like we said, have it at Folly Allen in Buffalo.
Very fitting that Allen's involved. And I just want to give a quick shout out to your guys' former producer, AJ, is in the chat right now saying hello. So AJ, good to see you, man. Former guest of the show. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And yes, everybody watching, before we kick off the episode, I just want to give a few plugs. Please attend the live event. You'll leave with the even bigger IQ than you already have from talking to all the Cover One guys about football. It's going to be a very fun event that it pains me to not be able to go to this year. I'm going to make sure that I make time to go next year because I really want to see all of you. But as always, make sure to like this video, like all the content that's coming out on Cover One. We work very hard in the offseason and regular season especially to just provide you with any engaging content that could keep your football itch scratched for as long as possible. Everyone puts a lot of effort in, so it means a lot to us if you could subscribe to Cover One, like any of the videos, and also subscribe to the One Pass, which is in the description below. You can join the premium Slack channel, get some insider info, or just talk football 24/7. There will always be someone to answer your requests. And now, let's kick it off, boys, because we have a fun show today. Training camp is just around the corner, and there's a lot to be looking forward to. Now, with a roster like the Buffalo Bills, there's a lot of positions that are pretty much set in stone, right? We don't have to talk about a quarterback battle, knock on wood. We don't have to talk about really any wide receiver battles, but there are a few things to keep an eye on. So really, I want to ask you both, and I'll start with you, Mike. We'll go to you, Kevin, but talk about a positional matchup that you're excited to watch and why.
So there's two that I could choose from. The first two that come to my mind is obviously middle linebacker, because we know that's the most glaring hole on the team. And then there's that wide receiver 3 battle that Kevin and I talked about on our show this past Tuesday. So I'll avoid that for now, because who knows how truly important that will end up being and how they'll end up attacking it. But I'll go with the obvious answer, middle linebacker, because there is a lot of uncertainty with that position on the Bills defense right now. Who has the advantage? Is it a guy like Dodson who has experience and is a veteran coming back on this team? Or is it one of the youngsters in Terrell Bernard? Balin Spector has been rumored to be part of the conversation. I know they brought AJ Klein back. How big of a decision will this end up playing in the defense's success or failures in 2023? Ultimately, I think it's not a huge decision who ends up winning that job. If the Bills were overly concerned about who would be the starter in that role and didn't believe in any of the guys that they currently had on their team, they would have made an outside move, I believe. They would have brought in a veteran free agent. They didn't feel the need to spend even little money to make a move like that when there was options available before the draft. Then you bring in Dorian Williams, late third round. So with all the talent they have surrounding this team on the line and the secondary, and even having Matt Milano as your linebacker mate, I don't think the Bills are really that concerned how this ends up playing out and are comfortable with one of these three guys. Even if on the outside, we have a lot of questions about who will end up getting that job.
If you look at, so Mike already touched on one of my favorites, this receiver 3, because I just don't think it's locked up. So I don't think that it's some grandiose, going to be just Dalton Kincaid. I do believe that it's going to be a mixture of different package. I think you're going to see Trent Sherfield a lot. I think you're going to see Deontay Hardy in the slot and outside. Most people don't realize that they signed Hardy and Sherfield both with a ton of snaps at every single wide receiver formation position. So they play X, Y, and Z. So what's interesting about those two players are they wanted that versatility so that if they need to bounce them outside, they were sick of hearing about having no boundary receivers behind. And then they go and draft Justin Shorter, who is another boundary first receiver. So they were sick of hearing about not having boundary receivers. However, they accumulated boundary receivers who could also play the slot. So I don't believe that was random, but really for the purposes of what I'd like to discuss here today is right guard. I don't know that it's locked up for O'Cyrus Torrence. I think that there's a big battle there. David Edwards could be a part of it. I've heard he looks great so far in minicamp through going into training camp. We don't know how injuries are going to play out, but between Ryan Bates, O'Cyrus Torrence, and David Edwards, and maybe even Ike Butker, I don't anticipate him winning the job, but there is going to be a battle at right guard that the team doesn't historically just place to a rookie. That's actually been one of their downfalls, where they're not, willing to just give a job to a rookie. Same thing at middle linebacker with Dorian Williams. I do believe that they felt more comfortable than we do because this was the season they expect for Terrell Bernard. Truthfully, I think they like his matchup ability, his speed, and the way that he can play in multiple different formations. And they want to give that a shot. So if that falters, then you might see Dorian, then you might see Dodson. But I do believe that for me, it's Terrell Bernard to start off in the middle linebacker position, and we'll see how that plays itself out. But that right guard is going to be fun. Can O'Cyrus Torrence beat those other players, including an incumbent in Ryan Bates? And that slot receiver position is still going to be fun because I still think it could come out with something we're not expecting.
I agree with every take because my listing is middle linebacker, right guard, and wide receiver depth in that order. Mike, to your point, middle linebacker is an unknown. But I said this in an episode a few weeks ago where I talked about linebacker, specifically middle linebacker, and said that I don't think, based on the moves they've made, that it's going to be as big of a problem as the fans made it seem to be. I always almost say Terrell Edmonds. I don't know why. Probably Terrell Bernard Tremaine. Tremaine Edmonds was a huge unicorn at linebacker position, right? Big body, great pass coverage skills, and when he processed well, could clean up plays in the run game or at the line of scrimmage. They asked him to do a lot. You have Sean McDermott taking over this defense now, and without Edmonds means possibly a different designation of responsibility in pass coverage and run defense for different defenders. I think pass coverage duties are going to be split because even if you have someone who is adept in pass coverage in the middle linebacker position, then you're talking about, well, maybe allowing him to develop a bit and letting that duty kind of offset and allow to go to more people like a Taylor Rapp, like maybe some of your safeties, like Taron Johnson. trying to make things a little easier in a transition. And for that reason, if you are offsetting responsibility and making things simple for a linebacker, then I don't think there is as much pressure, because I trust Sean McDermott first and foremost to figure that out. He's great with pass coverage defense. He knows how to whisper to the secondary. But also it means that your linebacker is not going to be put under as much pressure and might be in a position to blossom as well. And it's for that reason that I'm excited to watch middle linebacker, because I think if you're simplifying this role and there's less pressure on the position as a whole, especially with, like you both said, Matt Milano, who's right there next to you, then I think you get the liberty of kind of being more excited for the strengths of the linebacker and not having to worry about their downfall as much. I think you can masquerade some of the deficiencies that maybe a rookie or second-year player or a veteran that's just simply not as versatile or talented as Tremaine Edmunds could be. For me, though, I said this a few weeks ago, I think Tyrel Dodson is the front runner. And the reason for this is because he's been there before. And I know that might not be the greatest reason, but Kevin, like you said, it's their kind of hesitation to fully throw a rookie in a starting position. It's not that they haven't, but they're kind of keen to trusting the veteran at that spot. They've shown it before. They showed it just last season. I think it's more likely than not that Dodson is asked to just be a man to anchor the box, be that front seven guy, not have to do too much in pass coverage, maybe transition the pass coverage responsibility again to the secondary, to the safeties. And then you're talking about a simplified role where I actually have faith in Tyrel Dodson to take that step and be an efficient middle linebacker working with Milano to just stop the runs and to be there for the shorter parts of the field. But I'm very excited for this guard battle. They do hesitate to play rookies. However, I think where Torrance has the leg up is the fact that Ryan Bates is so versatile that it's almost a crime to keep him hindered to one position. Now, Torrance has to prove it. If Torrance does not prove it, then obviously you give the role to Bates. He was there last season. He knows how to play the position, and he knows how to play under Josh Allen, being a part of that line. But if they feel that Bates can go anywhere, that Bates has this versatility, and Torrance is showing just really impressive camp, showing that he's, sounding up his footwork in the pass game, that his running ability, his run blocking ability is good as ever, which it should be. He's massive, and that was his bread and butter. Then I think it's his job. And I think it's really this type of mindset going into camp where it's, how can Torrance prove to us that he's winning this? Because I think they want Torrance to win that job, not at the expense of Bates' talent, but more to say, this will free up a lot of things if we can get Bates to go wherever you need him. And speaking of that role, I said this in a past episode, that's how I feel about Khalil Shakir in this receiving depth role. I find Khalil Shakir to be the Swiss Army receiver. I find him to be, again, you talked about bringing in Shearfield and Hardy, guys that could play. I say in and out. I'm going to stop saying inside and outside. I'm going to say boundary and slot, but they can play both, but so can Khalil Shakir. To me, though, I feel like Hardy has this speed and this kind of deep threat component to his game that makes me feel like he's going to be called upon a lot in this pass game and be a very big role, assuming he could stay healthy. Trent Shearfield feels like the death move to me, or someone that you're throwing in run blocking packages because he is a tremendous run blocker. But Khalil Shakir, I feel like it is a hindrance to keep him bound to one position, because if you talk about a concern with boundary depth, if you talk about a concern with slot depth, he's your guy that can plug that hole in. You need someone to take a play off. Khalil Shakir can be there, whether that's Diggs, whether that's Davis, whether that may be Deontay Hardy, whether you want to run a package where Kincaid's not on the field. I find that Shakir can be the guy that can show up anywhere, be wherever you need him to be, and make a play, because he proved as a rookie that he's capable of doing so. So I want to ask you guys, any more thoughts on this topic as a whole? Kev, I will start with you, go back to Mike.
Yeah, I think the topic for me is, will they jump to a rookie in some of these positions, including middle linebacker? Will they actually do it? Now, there's much talk about, maybe they will. Maybe this will be the season where they saw the Kansas City Chiefs. Maybe they're more willing to, talk about middle linebacker for a second here, where a rookie could step in, because look at how talented the rest of the roster is on the defensive side of the ball. You mentioned Matt Milano, but in front of them, you may have some form of Leonard Floyd, Greg Rousseau, Von Miller, Poona Ford, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones. Behind you, you have Poyer and Hyde back. You got Trey on one corner. Corner two could be discussed, but, by all, intents and purposes, you're hoping for a jump from Kyer Elam. So, you have a multitude of a defense that's analytically ranked top 2 in pretty much every category, actually neck and neck with Miami analytically for some reason. But that's what you see on paper is you can take that chance with a young player and have him develop. And if it's bad, you swap it out with a Terrell Dodson, or you go with a different route, whether, whoever you think will step right in. So I think that you're going to see the propensity to maybe there. And then same thing on offense. Like, look, at right guard, like you want him to develop. The knock on Osiris Torrance was that he's just a right guard for the most part. And nowadays that's a knock. That's a knock in 2023. But it wouldn't have been 15, 20 years ago. That would have been a player who went a lot earlier. So to me, I think that you trust those rookies, you put them in positions to play, and that youth movement's going to be huge, not only for the season to win, but for the cap as well.
Yeah, and going off of what you were saying earlier, Joe, I'm intrigued by what you said about Khalil Shakir, and where does he fit in on this offense? Because depending on which Bills fans you talk to, some people either think he's the next great thing, or other people will say he's not even part of the equation on this offense. I've been looking at the receivers. Obviously, when you look at Dalton Kincaid being your slot guy, that basically relegates each receiver down an additional spot. So when you're saying wide receiver 4 and 5 or 3, you're really talking about even lower than that, because Dalton Kincaid is going to be on the field quite a bit, occupying one of their spots. But I'm a big believer in Deontay Hardy. I think he's going to have a role on this offense. So as I was saying on our show on Tuesday, you already know you have Diggs, Davis, Kincaid, Knox. Those are four of your primary pass catchers right away. I think you can add Deontay Hardy to the mix. So now you got 5 guys right there. Really, you get to that 6th guy. That's the last person on your team outside of running back that will actually have a chance to make an impact in the receiving game. Not saying they can't be out there to block or certain schemes, but as far as like you're going to get 20 plus catches, you're going to have a chance to get 300 plus yards and some touchdowns. The 6th guy is probably the last person you're really talking about. And it's going to be interesting who ends up having the advantage when it comes to Khalil Shakir and Trent Sherfield, because as we mentioned, Trent Sherfield is going to see the field. He's going to be someone that is going to be involved in run blocking. Kevin has mentioned it on our show. Like, you don't bring a guy like that in to not see the field at all. But is he going to be part of the pass game? Is he really going to have much production from a receiving standpoint? I don't personally see a ton of it. But and then you have the question, if things are equal between Khalil Shakir and Sherfield in camp, you almost have to give the advance to Khalil Shakir because you have a 5th-round pick invested in him. You have him on a small contract, meaning you're not paying him much, and you can keep him for the next 3 years. So I think we also forget that the Bills ramped him up during the playoffs last year. We always discuss how he was barely used in the regular season, but he had over 50 yards against Miami in the divisional round, and he had 2 catches for 40 yards against Cincinnati in the next round. So you're talking about a receiver that had nearly 100 yards in the postseason last year, and if he didn't have that one drop against Miami where he was open, should have caught it, you're talking about nearly 100-yard performance in the wild card round. So I want to see what happens in camp, because I don't think there are any sure things or any certainty with how that bottom tier of depth at wide receiver is going to play out. I think the Bills have an open mind. They brought in Sherfield, I believe, to help out with some of the run blocking, but also to give competition to Khalil Shakir in case he doesn't take that step forward this offseason. So I think that's very much wide open, but that to me is what's going to be intriguing when you're talking about depth battles. Obviously, we already hit on middle linebacker and guard position, but that depth wide receiver battle is going to be really interesting.
Agreed. Khalil Shakir, I have faith that he is going to take that step forward. Again, I've made multiple points on the show about him, specifically that playoff game. You were seeing more of a reliance on him. And there have been times during the regular season. I posted that clip of Allen earlier in the week in the Baltimore game where Shakir got himself open when Allen scrambled from the pocket. There was a play in the New England game where he came up huge. Shakir has proven that he can be that kind of trusty receiver. But I think when you just talk about adding a Dalton Kincaid, who seems to be the guy that you want to shore up the slot, it's equal parts good and bad, because it's good in the fact that you're going to get these receivers involved and you can add them to your depth chart. And it's not really going to take away the opportunity for them to be on the field, because you could find a role for them, because, you know, Kincaid is lined up as a tight end. That's his role. That's his place on the depth chart. But I think it's also, well, how much opportunity could they truly get? Is it going to be kind of a one-trick pony type role in this offense where Shakir really is, like I said before, a Swiss Army receiver? Or are they actually banking on him taking a significant step forward where you could actually see him maybe rivaling for a future starting spot at even something like wide receiver 2 if Davis doesn't come back, or if you're talking about Shorter doesn't pan out and he plays the boundary very well? Does this indicate that he's going to be trusted more in the boundary? So I agree. I am excited to watch Shakir. It's going to be an exciting battle in camp to see how they perform. I do think they have a little more faith in him, but we're going to have to see. I want to. I'm sorry.
One more thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like,
no, go for it.
The thing too with me, as far as Khalil Shakir too, is Kevin and I hit on this last year a lot. Before and after everything happened, he was a day 2 talent. Coming out of Boise State, like, many projected him to be a 3rd round pick. He fell in the Bills' lap in the 5th round. This is not a Justin Shorter situation where, yes, the Bills took both guys in the 5th round, but Justin Shorter was a guy many people thought could be a 7th rounder or a UDFA, someone that could fall out of the draft. Khalil Shakir is a strong talent. He proved it in college, and you can move him around all over the field. Like, what do all of these wide receivers that the Bills brought in have in common? It's that they're not just locked down to one spot. You're not putting Deontay Hardy just in the slot every time. The same with Trent Sherfield. So it's possible they brought in those guys because they don't think Khalil Shakir is there yet, and maybe they want him to develop more. But it's also possible that basically, let's just have an open competition and see how this plays out. And when I look at it, you're talking about a 23-year-old that is young, that has a broad skill set. Why not try to turn that into something? That's why I'm a big believer still that Shakir could be that guy, and why I'm not as confident with the Trent Sherfield idea. Sherfield, yes, you know what he is, but you're talking about a 27-year-old. The one thing that the Bills want more now is positional versatility. Like, you see it with the running back room. They wanted guys that can – a bunch of different guys. They want that in the receiver room. We're seeing that at tight end now. Even at linebacker, they're doing it. I know we use the term like positionless football and versatility a lot, but like the Bills are basically – that's how they're attacking a lot of this stuff right now. So I think it's going to be intriguing, because if Shakir comes out right away in camp and looks great, he could be that 3 or 4 guy, in my opinion.
Positionless football seems to be the name of the game, and you're seeing it around the league. And a team I always kind of make that reference to is the Patriots, because you look at how they use safeties, and their safeties aren't just your traditional 2 strong free. It's like they're linebackers, they're corners, they're everything in that defense. So when you talk about that, you see it around the league. You can definitely see it with the Bills, and it's something I think will be a pretty heavy narrative this year when you see how they use some of their linebackers, maybe some of their safeties. I know, again, I'll bring it up again. I do this all the time, but the dime packages with like Taylor Rapp, that could be happening, and that could happen on offense too. That's why I don't think, when you talk about guys like Ryan Bates in the battle he's in, and talk about Shakir in the battle he's in, it really is just kind of like this open competition, but also the opportunity to prove like what you can do, not limit yourself to a box. And I think when you talk about bringing in Hardy and Sherfield, it is just, well, one, it's competition, but also why not just bring in as many weapons as you can if they're available, if they're affordable, if they have intangibles and traits that you can work with in your offense. Because important to remember, back in the successful 2020 and even 2021, when Beasley was your established slot receiver and they had that Isaiah McKenzie to be kind of the gadget speedster who could get open when you needed him to do those motions, to kind of get open intermediate, but maybe get deep too, maybe in the red zone. That's what I feel like the replacement is with Deontay Hardy, and adding in like Kincaid. Is Kincaid's the consistent slot, but Hardy's going to be kind of your gadget guy with some opportunities to go deep. But then you also add in more depth for your slot, because if you don't want to alternate Hardy and Kincaid because they have established roles, now Shakir fills that hole, and Sherfield as well. So I want to answer this question. I'll start with you on this, Kev, because I know you responded to him in the comments, but AJ actually asked, What's more important to find consistency at? Slot wide receiver, right guard, or CB2, something we haven't really talked about yet on this show. So I know you answered it, Kevin. What do you got?
Yeah, start from the back going forward. I think that's an order for me of the consistency. Cornerback two, the teams always seem to find consistency even without a cornerback two. Whether it's Levi Wallace to Jane Jackson, some of the worst starters on the roster were at that position. Regardless of what you think about those individuals, they were definitely on the lower end of starters, and they've been fine for the most part. I do think that has a more seamless answer, hopefully, in Elam. So that one I'm going to leave off just because I think that it should be solved outside of something going wrong there in training camp. But slot receiver is because it's so important to Josh Allen. And what's important to Josh Allen is winning football games, and it's that slot receiver. He's mentioned it. He went out and tried to find one with Cole Beasley late in the year last year, tried to find John Brown. He tried to find consistency at his receiver position. And what you just did there, Joe, was break down their entire receiving core in a way that is much better, regardless if you like Sherfield, if you hate him, regardless if you like Hardy or don't, or to our, talked about Khalil Shakir. It's a lot more consistent to where you don't have to bring in the ghost of John Brown onto the roster this year and hope for the best. It's like you just said, if something's not going right with Sherfield, guess what? You have, Hardy to take his snaps right away from him, or vice versa. If Sherfield's the one waiting in the wings and it just doesn't look good with Shakir, you have Sherfield right in there to block and to prove that he has done it before, not for the Bills, but had a very good season, beating out players from Miami to be their third receiver last year. So I think you have that depth that you're going to have all season that you were hoping for, but losing Jamison Crowder early on in the year, Khalil Shakir not developing his route tree as quickly as you would have hoped, and a couple other issues last year had kind of hampered that receiver room. To me, it's slot receiver because that's what makes your number one quarterback and one of the best players in the league tick at such a high cylinder. And then at right guard, to me, you need to find consistency there, and it's obviously a position I brought up, but I think that the difference there is that you have some stud options at the right guard, and I do believe that you're not going to need to swap and switch through that all season. But slot receiver for me is paramount to the success of this roster. And I do believe if you had Josh Allen on this show, he would tell you the same thing, that they'd be looking for someone to. They do like that versatility, switching people in and out of the slot, but I do think that Josh will say, I want someone 60% or more that I know their route tree and I know how they're going to play, rather than a different player in their every play. So I do see some precedent in swapping guys in and out, but I think that's going to happen all throughout the three starting receiver positions, including, when Diggs needs a blow and Davis needs a blow. So I think you're going to see Hardy in a lot of those situations there, but I do think they're looking for one established third receiver, and then maybe you'll have some times where those guys are getting blows. So I do think they want one guy getting more than 50% of the snaps out of the slot. And if that person's ineffective, they might make a change. But I do believe his number one goal here is to develop somebody that he knows where he's going to be on the field. And they throw the ball a lot, so they need him on the field 50% plus.
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, so for the Bills, I might agree that what do they need the most consistency out of those three positions? I'd say maybe slot receiver, because we don't really know what they're going to be receiving from any of those guys. Like, we don't, from a production standpoint, like that's probably the biggest unknown at the current moment, because you haven't seen Dalton Kincaid out there as a slot yet. We don't know what Hardy, Khalil Shakir, or Trent Sherfield will do in that role with Josh Allen. I feel more comfortable about the cornerback two and the right guard situation, where at CB2, you're either going to have Elam, Benford, or Dane Jackson. You kind of know, regardless of who you put out there, you're going to have the ability to have decent play. It might not be great production, but you'll get by. And even at right guard, you know that Ryan Bates is going to get the job done. And even if he doesn't win the battle, Osiris Torrance would have to outperform him to take that spot. So for me on the Bills, I'll say slot receiver, just because of the unknown of the position. But if I was going to say what's the most defined consistency at, regardless of which team and just what you want consistent production from, I'd probably go more right guard or corner, just because you as a quarterback, you want to know that you can trust the big men in front of you. And I know it all everyone says it all starts in the trenches, but we really saw a lot of the Bills' breakdowns last year begin in the trenches, which led to some of the issues. I think as much as I always talk about wanting solid slot options for Josh Allen, the Bills' offense did produce at an elite level without one last year. While I think in order to go take that step all the way, you're going to have to trust your offensive line. So I would probably want more consistency out of my right guard and quarterback too, in the long run, if I had to pick one of those positions.
Yeah, AJ, I'm going to say this. I definitely think CB2 is last on my list. And I think that's because you're getting healthy Trey White back, an all-pro corner. Looked like he was starting to gain his steam at the end of the year. Like, the thing is, we always say, like, oh, he came back, he wasn't himself, he lost a step. He was still pretty good. He just wasn't elite and got burned a couple times. But, you know, that happens when you're getting back on the field from an ACL tear for the first time in a year and change. So I think when you're talking about CB2, going opposite of a healthy Trey White who's poised for a big year, I think the beauty of it is we have such a deep and good safety room that even if that CB2 isn't truly up to snuff, and we've kind of seen it before, and this isn't a shot at Levi Wallace, but when you compare Trey White to Levi Wallace, you know, Levi's talent didn't exceed Trey's, but Levi held his own. And I think having that safety tandem that's as good as anyone in the league next to you benefits you, because now it's, you know, I have help over the top. I have assistants. I have people who can call me and put me in the right place. Or if I get burned, there's someone there to protect me. I mean, look at the Patriot game in the playoffs. I think that's a great example. So for me, I also think Sean McDermott is just so good at developing the secondary talent that it doesn't really concern me as much. I think if you had Dane Jackson, if you had Christian Benford, if you had Kaiir Elam, whoever it is lining up opposite of Trey White, that kind of, to me, feels like it's not as big of a priority. And it's not to say it's not important. You want a good established CB2. We're hoping Elam takes the league. By the way, I encourage everyone to be excited about Kaiir Elam. I have full confidence in him. I think when he explained his case on Eric and Ant's film breakdown with him a few weeks ago, it made perfect sense that he kind of felt like the game was slowing down. Then he got hurt. It kind of sped up again because he was missing time and he wasn't able to get on the field consistently, play at the best of his ability. Then he got kind of a groove going at the end of the year and started figuring it out. And then the Miami game comes and he was a dog. I think there's reason to be excited and to be convinced that that's his job and he's going to claim it. So CB2's last on my list. Receiver and guard, it's so hard to pick for me what's priority because I've made cases for both on the show. I'm very big proponent in slot, but I'm also a believer that your trenches got to be shored up if you want to have success anywhere else, including the running game. So it's a 50-50 kind of flip-flop answer for me there. I think with wide receiver, you guys have hit the nail on the head multiple times, but I'll just establish having that security blanket, having that person that on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8, whatever it is, the new Beasley, not saying he'll be the same type of player, but the same role with maybe different skill set. Having that person for Josh makes Josh a better quarterback. It makes Josh more comfortable. It gives him the trust to find that guy who he knows can break zone if teams are trying to drop back when they're in those positions, because why would the Bills run on 3rd and 8? They never have before. And not never have before. It's an exaggeration. What I mean is it's not their bread and butter. They're usually trying to air the ball out in that situation, and you kind of should. But when you have that established slot option, it makes things easier for you. It keeps the chains moving. It's likely that it's going to keep the ball in more of a safe situation versus it potentially getting picked off. You can get picked off anywhere on the field, but it's better than airing it out and hoping for the best and having corners and safeties kind of play on your deep threat. I think when you make that case, slot is very important. But then you talk about the guard position. You talk about protecting Josh Allen, especially. He's your most important asset. You need to keep him upright. You need to give him time. You need to prevent the middle from being blown up so he can see the middle of the field and hit that slot receiver. But also, you need to be physical in the running game because shoring that up puts even less pressure on Josh Allen. It allows the running back to get open. It allows him to be free, to get through the holes, to make plays, to take the slack off of the passing game, to have productive yardage in key spots when you need them, move the ball at will, move people around. Like, there is so much that can come from having established interior offensive line depth that, to me, it's a 50-50 split for both. So, AJ, I hope that answered your question. And I think, you know, you've all made very sound points. Again, you guys are a blast to have on. I love talking to you. It's always so much fun. So let us.
And you said something on Trey White too, real quickly. That was interesting on this cornerback 2 part of this discussion is He also, in 4 games that he came back, had to play the Bengals twice and the Dolphins twice, which you would consider the 2 top receiving cores in the league, most likely, in most cases, especially as a trio. So, and Trent Sherfield, I guess, was in on that trio, but definitely from the boundary positions where Trey plays, they're elite. Like you're talking about elite level, maybe the best to do it in Hill. And then you get right back around and have to, guard and decide how you're going to guard Chase and Boyd and Higgins. So 4 of those games are going to be a little bit skewed in your memory, thinking like, oh, I saw him get beat by Tyreek Hill. And it's like, yeah, it's Tyreek Hill. Like he's torched the best of the best. Like you're using a bad sample size, but in all other games that he played, his levels, his analytics are elite. Like he was better in some metrics than he was to finish last before his ACL injury. So there's definitely some perception that in that snow game, and everyone looked bad, except actually Khair scored actually really well, and that's why I think it's his cornerback 2 job. Beside Khair, most of the team had really bad scores in a lot of factors in that game. So you can't take that one. And then you remember the hill and the snow and just getting open for a touchdown. But Trey White's and you see all the preseason rankings and all the advanced analytics guys coming out, and Trey White's in the top in elite level in many rankings. Still Madden even put him, I think, and they'd be the one to make a drastic change in my opinion. And they even put him top 10 in their ranking. So to me, across whether it's fantasy, whether it's video games, or whether it's the analytics community, everyone still considers Trey White top 10, and I think that that's accurate.
Cornerback is so nuanced, man. And it's kind of it's so frustrating to talk about corners, and for any corner in the league, not just Trey White. You have to think about a lot more that goes into what you see, right? So like I talk about, I remember the Bengals game, the first one. I remember when Chase got the touchdown, or was it Boyd or Higgins, one of the 3 beasts in the end zone. I think it might have been Higgins. So Trey White is playing off of him and has no leverage on him, right? Like all Higgins had to do was cut inside. White can't defend that. If that was a perfectly thrown ball, perfectly executed play, that's a scheme issue. That's not a Trey White issue. But of course, that goes against him. These are the things you have to keep in mind when you watch any corner in the league. There's more to it than just, oh, he got burned, all this, where maybe the safety wasn't there on the play. Maybe the scheme had him drop back and he went up against the burner who got leverage on him, and there was nothing he can do because the position he was at on the field didn't favor him at all. Like there are times too where, again, they go up against elite talent. A guy like Tyreek Hill, a guy like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, name me one. Like elite talent is elite talent. Your defense, your schematics, everything that goes into game planning, the one thing that can always beat you is elite talent. You could have everything on the field set up perfectly and they could still beat you. We have seen Josh Allen do it to great defenses before. There was a year, 2020 even, he was going up against some of the best scoring defenses in the league and putting up points. Elite talent will beat you. It's not if, it's they will. But that's the whole beauty of it, is how good can you compete against them? And if you can compete well enough, then that's a great metric for me. Trey White, again, like you said, I'm glad you brought it up, Kevin. Bengals and Dolphins, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd. That is an incredible tandem of receivers. And honestly, I thought in the wildcard game, yes, it's Skylar Thompson, but Trey White made a couple key plays. One of them prevented a touchdown from being scored on what I considered was a reasonably thrown ball by Skylar Thompson. I think the whole point I'm trying to make here before we move on to the next point, actually, there's a question I want to address. Just look at cornerback a little differently if you haven't already. I'm not saying anyone in this chat, I'm not calling out anybody, but there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions to when a play happens by cornerbacks that I think wait just to see what was supposed to happen on that play. If it's a true one-on-one burning, it's a true one-on-one burning. But if we're talking about scheme issue, where you're lined up on the field, I think it's important to wait for those details to come out before we truly evaluate a corner's game. And this question I want to bring up before we go into it, because it's going to kind of segue into this next one. But Brandon asks, what do you think Kincaid's ceiling is, especially if they only ask him to be a big slot year one? Could there be a drastically different look to him depending on how much inline work they ask of him? That's a great question, Brandon. Mike, I'll give you the reins on this one. Start with you.
So I'm excited about Kincaid's ceiling year one. I'll just first off talk about what I expect from him, and then I'll talk about what I think his ceiling could be in a minute after that. I think year one right away, you're getting 45 to 55 catches for 500 plus yards, 5 plus touchdowns. I don't think that's too much to put out there for year one expectations. I don't want to be one of those guys that looks at him and says, well, he is a rookie tight end. He's not going to produce at a high level because they historically don't. I think the Bills look at him as, you're going to be our slot guy year one. You're an offensive weapon. You are one of the most dynamic players in this entire draft. You're coming in. You're going to contribute. And when you're tight end, a lot of the reason why many tight ends do get off to slow starts in their career, especially the guys that are late first round, high second round, is because they're forced to basically learn two positions. You're learning to block at an NFL level and play on the line. And then you're also learning route trees and assimilating yourself to NFL passing game. That's really difficult to do both of those things at the same time. Now, what Dalton Kincaid has an advantage over most new tight ends that are highly thought of going into the NFL is he already has a teammate in Dawson Knox that can take care of a lot of the responsibilities on the line. So is Dalton Kincaid going to be force-fed as much of the blocking that maybe most other new tight ends in the league would have to learn on the fly? I don't think that's going to be the case year one. I think they're going to ease him in. Like, not saying he's not going to ever play on the line. He's obviously he's a tight end. He has to play on the line every once in a while. But I do think primarily year one, he's brought in to help the passing game. So if you had to ask me what's a ceiling for him, I'm not saying he'll do this. I think it's entirely possible he could have 65 catches for 800 yards, 7-8 touchdowns if they focus him primarily slot, give him over 50% of the snaps, and they're basically telling him in that scenario, you're our number 3 receiver. Like, yes, you're a tight end, but you're our slot. So my ceiling is basically they're like, forget the tight end label. You're going to be playing football like what Mike Gesicki is, and you're just going to have a TE next to your name, but you're essentially a wide receiver. If they bring him into a more traditional role, then I'll go lower. But I do think a safe number is right around that 50 catch for 500 yards, 5 touchdown number. That would be my baseline over under to start the year.
Great point, Mike. Kev, you wanna elaborate, or do you think he's covered it?
Yeah, I think for me, I think you'll start to see more inline as he's proven to be a big slot, as he's proven to be successful there. I think then you'll start to see more true 12. I think the difference here with when people think of 12 personnel, thinking of 2 inline tight ends. But I think when you bring Dalton Kincaid on the field, you don't know what exactly the whole idea there is. You don't know exactly where what the Bills are going to do. Are they going to bring him in line for a moment? Are they going to line him up in the slot? Are they going to put him outside? Are they going to put him on the boundary? I mean, you're going to be able to do different things to where the matchup there, you don't know what to do. So if you dedicate maybe your top corner 1 to him because you're not sure what to do, or, maybe Diggs is in the game, isn't in the game with him. Maybe, you start to think run, and then you're able to have an advantageous matchup for Dalton Kincaid. So I think once he proves he's going to be force-fed the ball, I do believe that. I do think that Josh Allen's going to get, I don't think it's going to be one of those situations to where he comes in for 3 plays, a half, and is just kind of a decoy and just trying to figure it out. I don't think that's the plan for Dalton Kincaid as a first-round draft choice. I do believe he is going to be force-fed some slot snaps and may win that 60% that I was talking about earlier. However, as he develops that, I do think you'll start to see some more inline. I don't think it's going to be 0 inline that I've heard some people talk about. I think that he'll develop those responsibilities, and you don't need a ton from him there. It's not like you need him to be Lee Smith. You don't need him to be the best blocking tight end in the league. You just need him to be able to chip on some defensive ends, maybe pick up a blitzing linebacker, do a few different things that, he doesn't need to be, anchor against an Aaron Donald or something in line. I mean, he needs to make sure that he's able to help out his right tackle a lot of the times, because I do believe that you would see him more on the right side of the formation. So, he will have to, I do think that it's going to be able to help Spencer Brown out, but maybe they'll do some different things to where he goes to Deion Dawkins' side and doesn't have to, be as focused on blocking. And then you'll have Dawson Knox there to help out Spencer Brown. So it's going to be interesting to see how that they put this formations together. But I do think think you'll see some inline from him as the season goes on, and you might see some more traditional formations with him in it, as compared to early in the year, where I do believe that you'll see him getting some targets early on to get him going in games. I do believe that you'll hear his name early in the season.
Great points, fellas. And Kevin, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually something I haven't thought about. That is true, is you kind of want him to develop that inline game, because then it's even more of an unpredictable situation for a defense that's facing you. Oh, is he going to be blocking, or are they going to have him kind of branch out and get open? Like, that component of his game does matter. It doesn't matter to the extent of he has to be the best blocking tight end in the league. He just has to be effective enough where now he can be used in that role, because then that just opens up more for you in the slot component if you have him line up there. So yeah, Mike, Kevin, great points on that. So I brought this question up because I wanted to transition to a point that I think you got to ask every year, but which rookie are you most excited to see in training camp? Obviously, we've talked about Dalton Kincaid. So even though that's probably going to be the most obvious answer here, I'm going to just say Dalton Kincaid's my one. Let's exclude him from this conversation for right now, because we've given him his flowers plenty. Think of another rookie that you're very excited to watch in training camp, and I will start with you, Mike. We'll go back to Kevin.
Yeah, if you can't say Dalton Kincaid, it kind of limits it with how small this draft class was. But the two obvious answers for me would be Dorian Williams or Justin Shorter. And not really from the standpoint where I expect either to be big contributors on this team, but I do think they're players that have potential to develop into solid players. Dorian Williams is probably, I'll say Dorian Williams just for this, because we don't know what's going on with middle linebacker. Is there a chance he could play his way into the competition? If you take Brandon Beane's word from draft night, it sounds like they're going to try to slowly develop him, and maybe mid-season, if he's doing well, he could start earning more time. But it sounds like right away it's going to be more special teams role and in depth. But I'm excited to see how he develops, because obviously he could be the future of the middle linebacker position. He has the traits you're looking for. He has the speed. The big question for him has always been processing. So I want to see how he does look compared to his peers. Is he that far off from a Terrell Bernard or a Balin Spector or a Tyrell Dodson? Because none of those three guys would be considered studs from most people. So is there a noticeable gap between Dorian Williams and the aforementioned three guys that I said? Or could this be something where Williams does eventually get into that conversation much sooner than what some people might anticipate?
For me, I would have said O'Cyrus Torrence anyways, even if Dalton Kincaid was on the table. I do think that the ability to come in, and where he was picked in the late second round, to come in and be a starting right guard off day one is the kind of value you're looking for from a draft class. That is what you're trying to hit. And the Bills have been really good in the draft, but they faltered in the second round. It's been a challenging round for them. So did they get it right this time? They do tend to take players high evaluations that drop, which means why is that player dropping? Back to the old draft day adage of Kevin Costner. Why is a player dropping in the draft? Is there something other teams know? So that's what's interesting. And the Bills do tend to take those selections. AJ Appanaza had a higher score, Boogie Basham. They do tend to take those players in the second round. They trade up for Cody Ford and Zay Jones early on in McDermott's, basically running the draft probably via text message from Bean. So early on in their tenure, it hasn't been a great round for the organization. It just really hasn't. It's been a challenging round. They've done really well in the first round, in my opinion. They found some late round gems. The fourth and fifth rounds have been very good to them in the past. But the second round, third round's been pretty good. They hit Dawson Knox. They did pretty good with Devin Singletary, in my opinion. They've been okay in the third round. We'll see what Terrell Bernard and Dorian Williams are. But the second round has been a major challenge, and I want to see if they got it right this time. And so I'm very excited to see O'Cyrus Torrence come in and be the starting right guard of this organization. And to my point earlier, because if he can supplant some of the guys we've talked about earlier on the show, including like David Edwards coming over from a Super Bowl and Aaron Cromer, so he doesn't have the scheme, or the fit for the Bills yet. he has the experience with Cromer and winning a Super Bowl that would classify to me as not a rookie and not a newbie. So he has a pretty big leg up on a guard position too, if needed. So to me, is if Osiris Torrance can come in and beat a favorite of your offensive line coach who's won the Super Bowl, an incumbent, versatile guy, and then a guy in Butker who's been here forever, that's very impressive to say. And if he can come in and be a stud, that elevates the entire roster to our discussion earlier. So to me, I'm watching Osiris Torrance from this rookie class very, very closely. And his running counterpart at college, his left tackle, Richard Garage, an undrafted free agent, is a guy to watch too. Is there a tackle spot to be? There's no interior spots to be had by any slider or any off the cuff radar guy, but could there be a final tackle spot to be had by Richard Garage, a guy that played left tackle with Osiris Torrance at Florida and was really good? So he's going to be a guy to watch out for. I was actually shocked he wasn't. I thought he'd be for sure a day 3 pick. He's someone to watch out for. Can he sneak on the team? And if not, I do see him as a priority practice squad guy, someone that they'd like to develop at that tackle spot. So I'm watching him really closely to see how he plays into this positional battle, especially if there's an injury. But if there's not an injury, can he take down one of the incumbents in Shell or Quisenberry? So we'll see. But I'm watching out for him as a rookie too. So those Florida offensive linemen are very interesting to me. First and foremost being Ken Osiris Torrance take that right guard job, and will the Bills finally play a rookie? Or are they going to put him in the bucket with the other second round picks that I've gone through as someone who they just don't give reps to?
Great point. Yeah, I think for me, if it can't be Kincaid, it is Torrance, but Dorian Williams is right behind Torrance. Again, you hit the nail on the head, but I think really with Torrance this year, there's a lot to be excited about. And I think what I'm really excited about is the fact that there's no pressure. Maybe not no pressure, but not an exponential amount of pressure on Torrance to be ready for the pass protection game immediately. I think he has the leeway to develop in that regard. I know that's something he needs to develop in. That was part of his profile. But I'm really excited for this team running this year, man. And I think a lot of fans should be too. I think it's the most poised for success they've been in an offseason in the McDermott era for running. They weren't even that bad of a running team last year. It was more just the tendency, which I do kind of understand. When you have Josh Allen, are you really going to need to run the ball as much? But I think this year you're going to see a more heavy lean on it. And I think Torrance was the right guy for that. I think he transcends the Cromer type of offensive guards, offensive tackles, offensive linemen in general, because of what he can bring to the table just as an athlete, just as a guard himself. He's going to be formidable objectively. Like, I don't care what, I don't think I'm going to be wrong in this take. And if I am, I am. But he's a people mover. He's a big body. You get this man in space and he's going to take you down. I would love to see situations where Dorsey could figure out how to get him one-on-one with like a safety or a linebacker. He's going to maul him. And I'm really excited to watch that. I think, again, if he can shore up his pass protection immediately, then that's exciting. And that just adds another layer to it. But I also feel comfortable allowing guys like Andrews or Bates to maybe take that reign in those pass protection sets and keep Torrance as just your people mover, or maybe someone that you can at least hope to just hold his own enough in like a play action situation where maybe you want to show him, even though you're not going to run the ball. I just feel like his upside as a player, as what he can bring to the line as a whole, especially now that McGovern is manning the left side and he can be your true pass protection set guy. And maybe you can have like a situation where you pull Brown across if you don't trust your left side running protection. I just see the potential in Osiris Torrance, which is what makes me excited. But Dorian Williams is right behind him. And I've talked myself more and more into Dorian Williams as each week passes by. When we did our linebacker projections before the draft and everything, I was like, whatever, I think there's a drop off after Campbell, after Simpson, after even Sanders. I always forget his name. I don't know why. Maybe I shouldn't really have to remember it now, but whatever. But the more I see about Dorian Williams, the more I look about his profile, about his experience as Tulane, about the archetype of his linebacker, I see this potential for him to replicate a lot of what Edmonds left behind when he left. I think Dorian Williams, and I'm going to bring up this comment that someone just dropped a little bit earlier, which is I really just want whoever wins the middle linebacker to cover or hope that they can cover. Yeah, I think he's the guy to do it. I think he's the one that can develop to be that pass coverage linebacker if you want him to be. But again, I don't think he needs to be that right away, nor do I think that you have to worry as much about his pass coverage as you have to worry about him as a run defender, as a line processor. I think he's got a good IQ and can play the position intelligently. But I do think one of the problems with him is, can he move his blockers? Can he get around them? Can he make those plays? with a good D-line, I can see him developing in that regard, which is why I'm actually very excited for him, because I see this as, if you can put him in a position where you're not asking him to do too much, same thing with Torrance, you allow them to kind of organically play in the defensive scheme without being tasked with a huge laundry list of responsibility. Just make it simple. But you know that that part of their game is ready and it can develop as in the background while you have them on there. Then I could see the outlet where Dorian Williams is your starting middle linebacker. And I could see the path for that happening this year, maybe even midway through the season. And if he shows in camp, maybe even starting. So Torrance, I would say, then you add in Dorian Williams. And to add in one more, I'm going to say Justin Shorter. I am. I think Justin Shorter might be a low round pick, but I think the physical capability for his boundary receiver style, like, I think that can't be ignored. I think, one, playing with a big arm guy like Anthony Richardson is going to translate really well to playing with a big arm guy like Josh Allen. He's a good at ball tracking in the air. He can make those deep, contested catches. He can get himself open to make deep catches. An important thing to remember as far as his production goes is Florida was not a pass-heavy offense. They were a run-heavy offense. His numbers don't truly indicate what his ceiling could have been. I think Justin Shorter was brought into this team to establish his boundary role, to establish himself as depth, but to also be the litmus test, because if he can make those plays, if he shows you something, there's nuance in his route running, that he's able to get open and to get open down the field and make those 50-50 contested catches, he could be the dark horse to actually replace Gabe next year if Gabe does not get extended by the Bills, nor does he come back to the team. And it's someone that I'm keeping a very close eye on. Again, I have a lot of faith in the guy who played with a big arm quarterback to come into the NFL to play with another big arm quarterback, a little bit of familiar territory. And again, I don't think he's going to be asked to do too much in this offense right away. So maybe the limited snap counts might be a hindrance to some degree, as I feel they kind of were to Shakir, although there was reason for Shakir not getting a lot of snaps. I think Shorter has a very good opportunity to prove himself as the future of the boundary receiver too, beyond just Stephon Diggs, but more so in the case Gabe Davis leaves. That's the guy I want to keep an eye on. And also, I know we made the case for Shakir, but I think Shorter deserves to get the opportunity for that role as well, considering that's really what his style is. So any final thoughts, gentlemen, before we move on to another topic?
Joe, you just picked the entire rookie class. Where's Nick Broker? Where's Alec Austin? Come on. Where's the rest of the then you can't forget Nick Broker. You can't forget
Broker. Listen, I can make a case. But I didn't say. Listen, I went in order. I gave you my most prioritized, but I'm excited. Listen, I can say I'm excited to see all of them, but I think there's cases for all of them.
Can we think it's interesting they took 3 players off that Florida offense? I think that's kind of interesting. Off that 3 rookie Florida rookie offense. To your point on you brought up Florida, and just think that's interesting that they went with Shorter, Garage, and Osiris Torrance. 3 starts to be a trend. 1, 2, not a trend. 3 starts in one draft class. That's a trend. What did they like about that, Florida? That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I think that Florida offense was just it was physical as hell.
Maybe the big arm quarterback didn't matter. Maybe that was a thing. Maybe they're like, maybe this will translate. Maybe you're right in the fact that you don't just bring 3 from the same side of the ball. That is a note to follow as training camp approaches this week.
Maybe it was pure coincidence, but yeah. Maybe. So Alec, I'll leave the next time Judge comes on the show to talk about Austin, because I know he's a big fan of him. But any final thoughts, or can we move on to our next subject, gentlemen?
Let's do it.
All right. So this is something that I'm kind of excited to talk about, because we talk about the rookies we're excited to see, but I want to ask you both about the dark horses that might be in your mind. People that I'm not going to say are going to be starters, but people that I feel you could see contributing at some point to some degree that you weren't expecting to see contributions from this year. Mike, I'll start with you. Can you give me a dark horse candidate for a key role in the Bills' offense or defense, or even special teams if you want, this season?
Ask him about undrafted free agent.
What, Kevin?
I said ask him about your favorite undrafted free agent.
Putting me on the spot here. I really I don't know if I'll say a couple guys. Obviously, they're people that you already know of, but I think AJ Appanaza could be an interesting guy in this Bills defense this season. In all the talk about the D-end room, we forget that he had 6.5 sacks last year, which is nothing to just belittle. Like that's a solid number, especially from a defensive end that many people have been critical of in the past. Is there another leap? Can he get that number up to 8 or not? If he can take another step forward, you're talking about a pretty solid defensive end room. When you have Von back, Leonard Floyd, Greg Rousseau, can AJ Appanaza solidify this DN room where you're really not worried about Boogie Basham or Shaq Lawson or whatever behind them? So that'd be one of my guys on defense. Obviously, I feel pretty good about the rest of the defensive line. When talking about offense, I would say Deontay Hardy. I talked about him earlier in the show, but he's probably the guy that really isn't getting talked about by Bills Mafia the way that I think we will be once the season gets underway. The contract the Bills gave him, while not big, shows that they definitely wanted to go out and bring him in. You look at what he's getting paid compared to what Isaiah McKenzie was getting paid. He's getting paid nearly double. Kev, you're better with the number, so I don't know if that's just what was reported or incentives. But when he was brought on to the Bills, there was talk from some in the Bills media, and even Brandon Beane alluded to it during this press conference, that he's kind of being brought to take over the Isaiah McKenzie role. Now, the question is that the Isaiah McKenzie role from last season where he was the primary slot guy and had 40 catches, or is this the Isaiah McKenzie gadget role that he primarily had the first few seasons of his Bills career? I'm fine with Hardy in either, to be honest with you. If he's in the gadget role, you bring someone that has speed, elusiveness, agility, and can get you some sporadic big plays. But if he's also the slot guy, you have some quickness on the field that you haven't previously had at the wide receiver position. So Deontay Hardy would be my under-the-radar offensive guy, because I will say this. I've been kind of surprised. I don't want to be coming off as a Trent Sherfield hater, but because I do think he's
that's
a good
what a Trent
blocker
Sherfield hater would say.
But I've been very, I guess confused would be the proper word, why all of Bills Mafia is choosing to focus on Trent Sherfield when there was another receiver that Brandon Beane went out and signed before Trent Sherfield that gave more money to than Trent Sherfield, and that it's been reported that he's taking over the role of what your number 3 wide receiver on your team last year was. Why are we talking about Trent Sherfield when Deontay Hardy is seemingly coming in for a much larger role? And especially, too, when you look at the numbers, Deontay Hardy is younger. He is faster. He is more elusive. He has had better statistical seasons. He is more proven. 2 years ago, Deontay Hardy had nearly 600 yards in around 12 or 13 games. Yeah, I am pushing the anti-Sherfield agenda. I'm just saying Deontay Hardy is younger. Yes, everybody's going to think of him as a special teams ace because he's been a special teams ace. But you don't get 570 yards receiving for nearly 16 yards per catch in 12, 13 games without having some truly special skill set to you. So Deontay Hardy is my under-the-radar dark horse, even if the guys that cover one don't let me use that. I think the fan base isn't aware of what he can do, so I think it qualifies from that perspective.
What an under-the-radar guy, $4 million contract? I don't know. I don't think that's under the radar.
Joe, just let me go ahead, Kev, because Kev always does this crap to me. He wants me to fall in love with like guys 40 to 50 on the roster that are going to be only special teamers. But then if I say somebody that's like player number 30 on the roster, I get grilled. If we're not talking, I'll say one other player, and you'll probably grill me for me. I think Latavius Murray has an outside chance of doing some things with this team if he makes the team in the first place.
I think he will.
I do believe Latavius Murray is making this roster.
He will.
He is still productive. He's had something like 600 plus yards the last.
He's like top 5 in rushing touchdowns right now.
Yeah, everybody's mentioning Damian Harris, and rightfully so. Damian Harris is good. I do think there's a chance that Latavius Murray will will be a decent contributor. I don't want to say like 500, 600 yards, but I do think he could be a 250, 350 yard back that maybe has 3-4 touchdowns.
Well, Latavius Murray, in 12 games had over 700 yards. They proved this to me when I was at a bar and I saw them that they were, it's like on Twitter for some reason, and I saw that they were interested in Jamal Williams. As soon as I saw that, I knew they were looking for a red zone back, like 100%. And that's what I think the role for him would be. Take slack off of Josh, give the ball to Murray or Harris if he's healthy. But again, got to remember, they had 4 running backs on the roster last year with one of them manning mainly special teams duty, and then the other 3 being 3-headed back committee where Cook was developing and you ran Singletary and Moss. Now, I think it's Cook, Harris, and Latavius Murray as your 3-headed back. Your special teams ace is going to be Nyheim Hines, who's going to be your returner. But then he could have some pass snaps as well. But I do think that's going to be kind of how they trot out the running backs this year. And Mike, before I move on to Kevin here, I want to say this. I think Hardy has a lot of upside. I think the only true knock I have on Hardy is, can he just stay healthy? If he stays healthy, I see his role being very, very present in this offense. So just wanted to add that. Kev, what you got?
So we've already talked about one of my favorite dark horses in Richard Garage. So how dark horse are we going, Joe? Are we talking about Mike's fringe starters, or are we talking about like dark horse?
It's as vague as you want the dark horse mantra to be. Give me the most obsidian dark you can think of, or give me,
Kevin's
if
gonna
it's
pick
like
guys that
murky waters.
Kev's going to pick someone that's going to qualify for the practice squad and get like one appearance, like week 16 or 17.
I saw Raheem Mostert get actual running. I saw him get claimed and actually on a roster still. So that's what you'd like to say, Mike. But anyways, as you look through this roster, and I won't go the darkest of dark. We've already talked about Richard Garage, who truly is one of my dark horse candidates. But if you kind of ramp it up a little bit from the bottom, talking about 70s and on of the roster currently, I think a guy you always have to remember is Christian Benford. He's a guy that beat out Kaiir Elam, and you can't forget that. Like, as much as we do, and I like Kaiir Elam, Christian Benford's a guy they love in this defense. Will they find a spot for him on the field? I think so. So he's a guy that they want to try him at safety. They want to try him at corner. They want to get good players on the field, and his tackling ability is something that's unmatched especially coming from a small school as a rookie last year. So he's a player that they want to see get on the field. I don't know that it's going to come at the expense of Kaiir Elam, but how exactly will it be done? He's definitely a dark horse candidate, a guy on a rookie deal who they really, really like. And Christian Benford's a guy I'm going to follow all training camp, because I wouldn't be shocked to see him get starter snaps in a lot of situations here. So he's a guy to follow. I do truthfully like Mike's AJ Appanaza pick, because we talk about Sherfield, we talk about, Hardy. Some guy that's being truly slept on is AJ Appanaza. His advanced analytics are great. He was good down the stretch. He was defensive end 2 by all advanced metrics. Pretty much any stat you want to pull, whether it's production like sacks or whether it's rush rates, win rates. He is on the top end of DN2s, and a guy that we consider borderline cuttable at times. He's been very good. Any team in the league would take a 6.5 sacks or more as a defensive end 2 on their team, and he's better than most defensive end 2s in this league. And then now he's truthfully like defensive end 4. So he's like a defensive end 2 production playing DE4. I would say you have a really good value, and that definitely, as you get down to the 3rd and 4th and 5th at any position, you start to qualify for the dark horse candidate, and he's there for me. So I'm excited to see AJ Appanaza on this list with Christian Benford. And you talk about UDFAs. Richard Garage truly, I think, can make a push based on some of his metrics, and having a familiarity now with a couple of the guys on the roster is going to be a pretty interesting way to go with him. So I really think you got to watch out for Christian Benford in this defense, because I think this regime loves him. So I think when a regime loves, especially this regime, they're going to do what they can to find a spot on the team for him. So that's what's going to be interesting to me, and just track AJ Appanaza. And then I guess you got to pick the final one for me. It's Gabe Davis. I've never heard so many people talk about, him being a receiver 7 to some people. This guy's advanced metrics can even point to a receiver 1 in some categories. He's one of the best receiving touchdowns leaders in the league. He's top of playoff metrics. Like, he is, I think a few touchdowns away. I forgot who. I think it was Uber, who a few touchdowns away from being top 10 in playoff history.
Three away.
3 touchdowns away from being in the top 10 in playoff history. We're not talking about a guy who had won a Kansas City game. We're talking about a guy who consistently performs in the playoffs, playing for a contract, maybe looking at an extension here soon. So there's, to me, I'm classifying him as a dark horse. You talk to this fan base, and you wouldn't think he's a receiver too. You would
Kevin,
think that he's a number field.
Kevin, last 4 playoff games for Gabe Davis, he's averaging 4.5 catches, 97.5 yards, and 1.5 touchdowns per game.
100+ yards in that Miami wildcard game, by the way. Just want to point that out. And a touchdown.
People act like the guy sucks. Like they forget that 2 of the last 4 playoff games, he's been over 100 yards. And he's 10th in the league in touchdowns over the last 3 seasons, if you count regular season plus postseason. With 26, that's nearly 9 touchdowns a year for the last 3 seasons, which, like, for any player, that'd be great. We're talking about the first 3 seasons of his career as a 4th-round draft pick on a team that seemingly tries to be patient with their young players. And Bills fans, Bills fans can't sometimes separate disappointment from actual performance. It's okay to be disappointed with Gabe Davis's production last year, but it's a totally different thing to say he's a bad wide receiver 2 or he's more of a wide receiver 3.
He's the top of the list at receiver 2. Like, literally, yeah. I know everyone wants Jalen Waddle or T. Higgins, but those are probably the only 2 examples of players who are for sure better, and there's probably a couple more, but you're talking about a top of the receiver 2 list. I don't understand.
800+ it was like 840 yards and like 7 touchdowns this year, not including playoffs.
But fans will say, Joe? Fans will say, because you're on a pass-heavy offense like the Bills, that you could plug any of those other average wide receiver 2s and that they would have similar production, which maybe so. I'm not going to say that's not entirely possible. But what it discounts is if he had 48 receptions for 830+ yards, and what was it, 7 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns last year, and he had those 9 drops. Let's cut those drops in half. Like, suddenly you're talking about a receiver with 50+ receptions, 900+ yards, maybe closing in on 8-9 touchdowns. Like, so if that was a bad season for him last year, great. What is a good season for him? It could be close to 1,000 yards. The issue was people last year were going into the season, and we said it was possible. We didn't say it couldn't happen, but people wanted 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, 60 catches.
Which, can I add, Mike? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just need to, while you hit that point, he missed the game and played 2 games on a bum ankle and still put 800+ yards. Okay. And here's my problem. It's this has fueled my anger with the Gabe Davis discourse. I saw something on Twitter. Okay. Judge responded to the chart that showed how many touchdowns, I think it was wide receiver 2, or just most touchdowns scored in the league over the last 3 years, something like that. Someone said to him, he's a one-trick pony. The one trick is scoring touchdowns? Are you serious? And that's your one trick? That's great. Why wouldn't you want that? That is insane.
Yeah, and Roy, I know you're talking about wanting a wide receiver 2 that averages more than 3 catches a game. Roy, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but if you look at like receptions, how many wide receiver 2s are getting 60, 70+ receptions?
I already named them.
there's not a ton of wide receiver 2s that are putting up a ton of receptions. Yes, Gabe can improve in that area, but yardage is more important than catches. Yardage is how much you're producing, and the fact is, we don't, and this part is missing from the Gabe Davis conversation. I don't understand why. The Bills are having him run deeper in moderate length routes.
Yep.
Those are lower percentage plays. You're not, like, I keep hearing his catch percentage is really low. Well, when he's running 15, 20 yards down the field half the time, those statistically do have lower catch rates. And yes, he needs to cut down on his drops. But the other thing, too, is how many of these wide receivers are getting 5-yard outs and simple dump-off passes? There's a lot of receivers that benefit from simple, easy catches where they toss it to them and then they ask him, get some yards after the catch. Gabe Davis is not benefiting from a lot of these easy plays that can pad your stats because it doesn't fit what Dorsey has schemed for them.
Or garbage time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, like, let's not confuse Gabe's production with some other guys and say Gabe's not doing this because he can't do it. He's not being asked to do a lot of those things. So things that could help pad his stats, he's not getting those opportunities. So, and I just want to add one more thing. If Gabe could be a $12 to $13 million a year extension, me and Kevin talked about this on Tuesday. I sign up for that right now.
100%.
Right away. If you could get him on a 4-year deal where you're paying $12 to $13 million a year, and maybe it's a 4-year, $50 million deal, sign me up. Because you know for that period of time, you're going to have a weapon that Allen trusts, that's a deep threat, a person on a second contract that you got good value from the 4th round. And to be real, if you sign him for that right now, he might be earning 15, 16 million next year, depending on what he does this year anyway.
Yes. I want to add again, I feel like the discourse on Gabe Davis would be entirely different if he had just not missed that game. Obviously, I'm not saying like I'm angry at him for it. It was just an unfortunate injury. He plays that Titans game and he's healthy for that, the Miami game, and the Baltimore game, like fully healthy. He hits the 1,000-yard mark. I'm guaranteeing that based on his production, based on his per game stats. He's hitting that mark. And then you're going to have everybody with an entirely different perspective of him because he hit the arbitrary 4 digits. But again, Gabe Davis is a vertical guy. It was very hard for him to get, when you talk about the Bills offense and you talk about him being a burner, the one thing that I think enhances Gabe's play is having the underneath stuff for him, having an established slot receiver, because you have to remember too, in the Cole Beasley era, when he was a rookie, he was getting integrated into the offense. The following year, they bring in Emmanuel Sanders. Maybe it's a similar situation to like what you guys said about Shakir before. They didn't feel ready or don't feel ready, and Shakir maybe taking the full brunt of it. So they add in some help. Emmanuel Sanders comes in. So obviously that splits targets, that splits yardage. Gabe gets his first opportunity and he has over 800 yards, misses a game, plays on a bum ankle for a couple others, and still performs well, still has a couple of solid games, and also has touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, I believe, 7 touchdowns off the top of my head. For a wide receiver too, I'm taking that 10 times out of 10, and I know that he's capable of more. It was also his first year manning the wide receiver 2 spot fully, and the first year under Ken Dorsey, where there could be attributes of maybe some decline in production to him, or maybe even to Josh Allen, who threw a bad ball, because there are plenty of examples of Josh Allen throwing inaccurate passes to Gabe Davis, but we're not going to fault Josh Allen for that. No, we can. It's not all on Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis is the wide receiver 2 I want on the Buffalo Bills. I will pay him $12 to $13 million. I am tired of the disrespect this man is getting. I have tried not to get angry about it, but I am angry about it. We need to put more damn respect on Gabe Davis's name. And even if his numbers replicate this year, I'm fine with it, because I also think his numbers will look the same because of more offensive production at other spots, like with Hardy, like with Kincaid, maybe more running. Okay. My dark horse, because I forgot that that's the topic we were on. So you're going to hate me for this. You guys are going to hate me for this. Kevin might hate me for this based on what we just talked about. So you made a good point with Benford, but here's my thing. I'm going to say Austin. I'm going to say Alec Austin. I'm going to say he's the dark horse to contribute. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because Dane Jackson's on a 1-year deal. He's expendable. And I feel like cornerbacks in late rounds are just apples on a tree for Sean McDermott and co. I am not only confident, but I am convinced that Dane Jackson's trade bait, or at the very least a cut candidate, and that they would use Austin to supplement the depth in the cornerback room. I'll keep it simple. That's how I see it. I think it's going to pan out that way. It's no disrespect to Dane Jackson in his game, but I feel like you have the opportunity to get a younger player under more cost control for a couple more years, playing a more primary depth position versus the guy you know is only here for one more season at most, unless you want to extend him, which I just don't see the point in doing if you can replicate his production with someone like Austin, who I feel complements this Bills defense well. So,
I sign an ink right now for Alex Austin to win that final corner job on his rookie deal and to trade Dane Jackson for a 7th-round pick. Here's the pen. I would do it right now because I do believe that that's the right move, and Dane Jackson's just poor.
Signed, sealed, delivered.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Dark horse. That's a good dark. That's what a dark horse is. Like, I consider like Christian Benford or down But I had to bring up Gabe Davis because, like, you would think he's in line with Alex Austin because of what people talk about. Like, Rich, might as well be Richard Garage, with Gabe Davis, because that's like where people place him, as like this garbage bottom of the barrel receiver. People, like, I don't understand. Like, the league would not dictate that. He is literally talking contracts back to earlier, the point of $10 to $15 million contracts, and it would be backloaded anyways. You're talking about like $8 million in the early portions of his years, and if he's not good, he's not going to see the fourth year of that deal anyways. It's going to be like 19 million probably. He wouldn't see it. So the point is, he's probably more like a 3 for 30. So like
another thing to bring context to.
Mike, I'm so sorry. I just have to say this real fast because I'm going to forget. I actually had to write it down. I am willing to bet, I will put money on this. This is the most times that Richard Garage has heard his full name used in an hour span. Most. I'm willing to put money on that.
He did play at Florida.
On a Bills podcast.
Okay, I would even be willing to wager ever. Like, how many times has someone called your full name out in an hour multiple times?
You're doubting, you're understating the value of SEC football in the South.
Okay, all right. Well, they're yelling at him and saying, "Mr. Richard Garage."
On Florida, I guarantee you they probably have a podcast just like us where they're talking about their linemen down there.
All right. He goes by first and last name. Like, I feel like if you're like a Gators fan, you're saying Garage, or you're saying like the nickname they might give.
But they're probably used to Garage. Would Bills? If I'm talking about a Garage, would Bills fans be? I'm talking about Richard Garage, their potential left tackle.
I'm sorry, Mike. Sorry. Please continue your point.
You're good. The one thing I do want to say, I looked up the stat like months ago, so I apologize if I get it incorrect, but I believe there's only 4 number 2 receivers in the NFL league wide last year that had 1,000 yards. So I think another thing that gets brought up in this Gabe Davis conversation is people look at Miami, where they have Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. People look at Cincinnati, where they have Higgins, Boyd, Chase. And there's this misperception that a lot of these great teams have multiple elite guys at wide receiver. And that's just simply not the case for the overwhelming majority of NFL teams. It's very rare to have 2 1,000-yard receivers on your team. So you put some context to that, and I think it makes Gabe Davis's case even better. Like the yardage, I think it was somewhere like Gabe Davis, I think, finished like 34th or 35th in receiving yards last year, and he was tied for 15th in touchdowns. So when you look at 32 teams, there's 32 number 1 wide receivers. Then you have 32 number 2 receivers. If you're finishing in the top 35 in some key statistical categories, it's pretty clear you're near the top half of your wide receiver number 2, regardless of what metrics.
People want a receiver 1. Let's just call it what it is. People are saying receiver 2, but they mean they want another receiver 1. That's what they're saying. That's why they wanted Hopkins.
100%.
Yep. And if Davis hits 1,000 yards, he'll get that moniker. That's what people want. That's all they're looking at.
Too. That's the problem. They don't want.
And I want to just real fast, Patrick. This is a great dark horse candidate too. I fully agree. This is another dark horse to watch out for in the linebacker competition, because if they do, in my opinion, if they go for what I said earlier in the show, where they're offsetting pass coverage responsibility, I think Balin Spector of the year 2, year 1 guys might be the best run defender you could ask for. I think he's the one that might be the one that could take it. I think that's just the nickname, which I think would be a sick freaking nickname for Balin Spector. I'm assuming, unless that's autocorrect. And also, Rick, yes, your mom might have called you by your first and last name, but how many times do you think she did it like in an hour? How much trouble were you in that she would have to use your first and last name in an hour? I'm asking genuinely. I'm not saying, you're probably a great guy. I don't want to assume you were getting into trouble as a kid. You know what I mean? But like, did she say it? Like, I wish I had a counter, Kevin, for how many times Richard Garage was said specifically. It had to have been over 10.
Richard Garage counter on the bottom right. We want a Richard Garage.
I wish.
There's two more.
I wish. All right, so gentlemen, we'll hit the home stretch of the show today. I got one more topic for you, and it's probably the one you were expecting based on kind of what I said about Dan earlier. I said trade, but who do you think gets cut? Are there any surprise candidates in your mind, someone that you think fans aren't prepared to see go? And I'm going to ask, who did I call upon first? I can't even remember. Someone just take the first go. Someone just take the first. All right, Mike, you take the first go.
Oh, God. Me being the first guy, this is tough. I would say the surprise cut that would come to my mind first would maybe be a Nyheim Hines. I don't even feel confident saying that, just because I do think maybe they do have a niche pass catching role for him out of the backfield. A lot of that might come down to who do you prefer at running back number 3? Do you want a Latavius Murray that maybe gives you little similarities to Damian Harris, who could be a threat in the run game in the red zone, or do you want more versatility and add someone that could bring a little bit of a more dynamic pass catching skill set out of the backfield with the speed and special teams presence with Nyheim Hines? So I'd say Hines potentially could be. And then if you're looking beyond there, I'm not saying this would be a surprise cut, but a name that like we recognize would probably be like a Shaq Lawson. Could he be someone that is on the outside looking in? You look at the D end room right now, you have a top 4 pretty set. So with having Boogie Basham and Shaq Lawson, one of them probably is they'll probably try to unload and trade, but what are the chances someone's going to actually trade for a Shaq Lawson at this moment or a Boogie Basham? Probably not extremely high. Maybe someone takes a 7th round pick to see if Boogie Basham has anything. And the other guy that I could potentially mention is Dane Jackson, just because if you guys, some of us are looking at Alex Austin and thinking he could take a step up. Would someone trade for Dane Jackson? Possibly, maybe, especially late August. So those would be 3 guys off the top of my head. I'm sure if I went through the entire roster and went position by position, there'd be some other guys standing out to me. But those are the first 3 that really pop into my head.
The Bills have some tells with their contracts and how they structure them. Latavius Murray is absolutely on the roster. He's getting a full guaranteed contract. You wouldn't cut him. He's the same amount of money to keep. So it doesn't make too much sense to cut him. They would have to then go pay another replacement player money anyways. So the tell there is at running back. What's happening there? Nyheim Hines is a good pick. I think he would classify as a surprise cut. Could he get double traded? It's possible, but because anybody that's a surprise cut in the Bills world on their roster is definitely a trade candidate, because that would put them in the position. And I think the Bills have made Brandon Bryant, for instance, a cut. They would have cut him already. So I think that there's definitely some trade candidates, and some that you're going to speak to is Boogie Basham. I think that with the defensive end, we talked about AJ. I think Shaq Lawson could beat him out. With Boogie Basham, could he get some value for him, or do they want him to play because he would be under contract next year still? I think that's a fair player to pick. I have Terrell Dodson as my surprise cut. I don't think he makes the roster, especially if he gets beat out by the rookies. I think that you're looking at AJ Klein there for special teams and the veteran presence, but I'm not 100% that Terrell Dodson makes this roster. That would be mine. And then obviously you guys have talked about Dane Jackson a lot, and for Alex Austin, but don't sleep on Cam Dantzler, a guy that has a lot of starts in this league against premier receivers, and he's been good. So watch out for Cam Dantzler to at least be the vet in the room. That him and Alex Austin combo could definitely take down Dane Jackson and be one of those surprise trade candidates. But the Bills always seem to trade from the offensive line unit, even if we don't think that player is good. So watch out for a surprise trade from that, especially that deep. Could Ike Butker get traded? Could Greg Manns, David Quisenberry? There are some names there of guys who are just nothing to us, but the Bills always get 6th-round picks for. So watch out for some of those names at the offensive line position. Wouldn't necessarily be quote unquote surprises, but to bring up Garage, could he make the roster? It would come at the extent of one of those players that I just mentioned. It would definitely come at the extent of like a David Quisenberry. Could you get someone from the open market? And my last one is Quentin Morris, surprise cut. I don't think he makes the roster. I think the idea there is that you hope him onto the practice squad, and then I don't believe he'd get claimed.
Yeah, that's a good point with Morris. That's one of the ones I would think too. I mean, bringing in Kincaid, you have Knox, and also Gilliam, who can line up as tight end if you need to. Like that. Practice squad seems to make the most sense. I'm going to say you guys hit a couple of them. I already said Dane Jackson before. One of the ones I could honestly see going, well, I'll start with Bakker. I think the Achilles injury put him in a rough spot only because it seems like they've shored up enough depth where they wouldn't really want to hope that he comes back from the injury 100%. Like, if he doesn't, it's even worse for his case. Even if he does, I feel like there's just people that could replicate that spot. So he's one I would consider. Not that he couldn't be a starter
He'd
or
be a
play
trade candidate. He would classify in that trade candidate for a late round pick for a guard. Seriously.
Cut and trade is so murky here. I should have made it cut/trade, so I apologize, because it really could go either way. I could see Jordan Phillips going, to be honest. I think health concerns. Yeah, I think that's a sneaky one too. I mean, it's just the fact that he doesn't stay healthy. And I love Jordan Phillips. I think he's a great player on the Bills. I think he's very disruptive, but when has he been healthy? Like, seriously. And this year it was honestly extremely disappointing because, you know, I commend him for playing with the torn labrum. I have nothing but respect, no discredit at all, but I just don't feel like he's going to give you a fully healthy
season. Can I give you one on Phillips real quick? Just real quickly.
Yeah.
$2.8 million on the cap. 1.2 is all it's owed. They save $1.6 million. In counter, Tim Settle has a $4.3 million cap hit with, if he's cut, it's 5.1. It actually accelerates. It is a tell that Jordan Phillips is not for sure on this roster, especially if you can replace 1.6 million and sign a veteran free agent like DJ Dale on the roster, or even go with your, old faithful Eli Anku or something. So there is tell there, contract related, that a DJ Dale or a Eli Anku could make a push there.
I will say this too, because you guys brought this up. Shaq Lawson, I don't think is going anywhere because AJ Appanaza and Leonard Floyd are terrible run defenders, like graded so poorly. And Shaq Lawson is a pretty good edge run defender. I think he has a role in that regard. Might be a bit of a one-trick style with occasional pass rush, capability snaps, but I don't think he's going to go anywhere because I think they trust him to man that. So I think he stays put. So really, I guess the final one I'll look at is really someone from the linebacker room. Again, I think Dodson would be the younger guy you want to keep and maybe be your potential starter, which is why I could see them kind of maybe moving on from Klein. But I also think the loser of that first and second year linebacker battle is the one that either gets demoted to practice squad or cut or traded. And I think that probably of them would probably be Terrell Bernard. I feel like I just don't think of the three, he's the one that's going to win it. I just don't. But I could be wrong. I'm always open to being wrong. But I feel like because he's a second year guy with such higher, I should say, draft stock, he's someone I could absolutely see them deciding to trade if he doesn't show improvement in camp or willing to win that linebacker battle. So that's really my grouping. But gentlemen, do we have any final thoughts today before we wrap things up?
That's it for my end. It's a great show.
Yeah, I'm all good. Appreciate the talk, having us on, and it's exciting just to have football back.
It's very exciting. Well, gentlemen, first and foremost, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday to come here on this show and talk some training camp with me and get angry about Gabe Davis with me. It was a lot of fun. You're both great guests. You're always welcome back. To all of you in our comments section, once again, thank you so much for your contributions, for joining the discussion. We appreciate you. I appreciate your time every single week for you taking time out of your Saturday to come watch this content. If you could please do me and everyone on this network a favor once again, and just please like this video and like the content that's on Cover One. Check the description. The premium pass link is in there. You can subscribe and join our Slack channel and find some cool behind the scenes stuff, some film discussion, everything you could think of involving the Bills and football. And also, Cover One merch. I'm sure it's going to be linked on below this video. Eric cracked the code and figured out, but Cover One's got merch now, and you should definitely check it out because it's high quality material with some reputable brands. Join the branding, man. Get that, wear it with pride, walk around in it, show off your support. We really, really appreciate it. Again, a lot of the guys are going to be at training camp this upcoming week and the meet and greet on July 28th. So please, please, please check that out. You can find more information on the Cover One Twitter account, or if you're in the Slack as well. All of you, thank you so much again for joining me today. I had so much fun. Kevin, Mike, I'll just give you one last chance to plug whatever you got going on if you want before we sign off.
Yeah, as some of you already know, watching the show and hearing us before, Kevin and I co-host Going Deep podcast Tuesdays at 7 on Cover One Network. So if any of you haven't checked out our show yet, we'd love to see you hop on the chat and join our show. One of these upcoming episodes obviously have a lot going on with training camp. So we encourage interaction just like Joe does here. And we love everyone that interacts with us. And then if you're ever looking for any more content from me, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike_Bunt.
As always, Tuesdays at 7, like Mike said, for the Richard Garage Show. Stay tuned for that because we're going to be bringing you a UDFA special, much to Mike's chagrin. So look out for that in the coming days. And good luck, and we'll see everybody at training camp.
Oh man, I have to tune in. I hope I'm free when you're doing it, because if I am, I got to count how many times you say his name, like formally, so I can present you the list. But yeah, you guys, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time. All of you in the chat, again, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Even though I'm going on vacation, I'll still be back in a week, and we're going to do, updates on actual training camp episode, probably with some of the guys who are there. So I'm really excited for that. You all enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Stay safe. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the beautiful weather. But as for this show, for Mike Bunt, for Kevin Messeri, and for me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa, thank you all again so much. I hope to see you soon. And one final for you. Go Bills.
Previous play will go under review.